FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse senior editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And the big news that come out of Washington this week comes as a result of the big news that came out of Washington last week. Earlier, when we came to you in this program last week, we were talking mostly about the confirmation hearing for for Ag Secretary nominee Sonny Perdue at the Senate Agriculture Committee. At that hearing, they did not take a vote to approve his nomination. They waited until this week to do that. Originally, it was supposed to happen on Wednesday, ended up happening on Thursday due to the lack of floor votes on Wednesday. Phil, you were there in the room when it happened, gathered just off of the Senate floor, did members of the Senate Agriculture Committee, and really saw a mostly positive affirmation of his nomination from committee members.
Yeah, it was very quick. There was this ornate, because it's so hard to get a quorum together for a committee, which you need to vote. They sometimes gather for, if it's not controversial, gather in this ornate room right off the Senate floor. That's what they did. Probably took maybe 30 seconds to do a voice vote. There was one exception though, and that was a bit of a problem. The chairman of the committee, Pat Roberts, really wanted a unanimous vote out of the committee to put some pressure on Democrats to allow a quick Senate floor vote as early as next week on Sonny Perdue, but he didn't get it. The senator from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat, she insisted on voting no. Senator Roberts almost pleaded with her not to do it. She would, but she insisted on being recorded as voting no. So it was not quite unanimous.
Yeah, not quite unanimous, but borderline unanimous, about as close as unanimous as you can get. Phil, were you able to get any kind of insights from committee leaders or perhaps from the Senate floor about when we should expect further proceedings on potentially Secretary Perdue's nomination?
Well, it's a big question. Democrats they've been delaying a lot of things. Things are really polarized over in the Senate right now as well as over on the House and the rest of the nation's capital. It could be as early May before we get a vote. Here's the problem. The Senate is going to be tied up next week on Supreme Court nomination of Neil Gorsuch. And then they're on recess for 2 weeks for the traditional Easter recess. And then they come back and we have this deadline hanging over us on April 28th when funding for the government, the federal government, runs out. There's work behind the scenes now to try to put together a government-wide, mostly government-wide spending bill that would fund agencies for the rest of the fiscal year, fiscal 2017. But they've got to deal with that right after they come back from recess. So can they fit time in there to do Perdue? I know it's going to be difficult.
A lot of people very happy that they were able to see some movement on Perdue's nomination, but the movement is not quite done. He still cannot take up residence at the Department of Agriculture, still needs that full Senate confirmation before that can happen.
Yeah, and we should say that the ranking Democrat on the Ag Committee, Debbie Stabenow, is working on her side to try to clear any roadblocks, clear any objections to moving forward on the Perdue nomination and the vote. We'll see.
She issued a statement shortly after the vote saying she was in a disagreement with him on a few policy points, but supported his nomination generally. So it'll be interesting to see how that carries out throughout the rest of the Democratic caucus and moving forward to a potential floor vote. Speaking with administrative action in this case, we've seen a lot of reports and a lot of commentary about what a Scott Pruitt Environmental Protection Agency might look like and how that might benefit agriculture and what that might all entail. And this week we really saw the first indication of that in terms of actual action. Earlier we saw action on the Waters of the U.S. rule, but that was from the White House. And this week, Phil, we saw something from the Environmental Protection Agency that many in agriculture were cheering.
Right. EPA was facing a deadline, a court-ordered deadline of Friday to make a decision on whether to ban the very widely used insecticide Chlorpyrifos, or probably best known by the trade name Lorsban. EPA was petitioned like a decade ago by a couple of environmental groups to remove the food tolerances, essentially ban this chemical. Under President Obama back in 2015, the agency actually proposed to do just that. They'd still been going back and forth with their scientific advisors on whether there was whether the evidence about potential harm to children in particular was strong enough to justify the ban. The Obama administration left this decision hanging when the president left office. EPA, Scott Pruitt, the new administrator, had this deadline on Friday. He announced late on Wednesday that they were declined. They would not ban it. They'll permit the continued use of chemical.
So we saw that action, and then as well a hearing that Phil covered earlier this week in the House Agriculture Committee. If you've been following Agri-Pulse.com, you know that the committee has been holding a lot of subcommittee hearings on establishing priorities for the Farm Bill, bringing in a lot of farm groups and saying, what do you want? What can we do for you in this next Farm Bill? What are your priorities? And earlier this week, we saw some action and saw a subcommittee hearing that's going to be really important for the future of the bill, especially because it dealt with the ARC and PLC risk management programs, which are probably two of the most hot-button issues, or arguably two of the most hot-button issues in the bill. Phil, the message that the committee got was not necessarily a preference for ARC or PLC, but really a desire to maintain both.
Well, yeah, and the backdrop of this is that the Congressional Budget Office is predicting that there will be a very large shift by farmers from ARC, the revenue-based program, to PLC, the price-based program, going into the next Farm Bill, if they have a choice, and presumably they will. So that's some particularly on the southern crop side, have raised questions. Do you really need to continue ARC? That would obviously free up some, if you did away with it, obviously free up some money that could be put into other programs. Certainly the unified message coming from corn, soybeans, wheat, barley and sorghum was to continue both programs. There was a joint statement on that also provided to the committee. But when you get to the details, those are still very much evolving, and in terms of what tweaks might need to be made to ARC.
So we obviously don't have a Farm Bill to report on at this point to let you know how that's all worked out, but that's something to follow in terms of the approach that both the House and Senate Agriculture Committees take on the risk management programs. It's going to be a big issue for a lot of your major commodity groups here in town.
And we're potentially not going to get to this bill, it looks like now, until possibly a year from now, spring of 2018. And so I think what you're going to see over coming weeks and months is groups like particularly the National Corn Growers, American Soybean Association, running a lot of numbers to see what different changes would do, and what's going to be politically possible, which is really the big question heading into this next Farm Bill, because money is tight.
We still have not seen official scheduled dates for the listening sessions that the House Agriculture Committee is planning to take, nor do we have a date for the planned field hearing for the Senate Agriculture Committee in Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow's home state of Michigan. So a lot more developments to come on the Farm Bill, but they've been holding a lot of subcommittee hearings in the month of March. Look for those to continue into April as well. But I think that's going to do it for this week's edition of Washington Week in Review. Certainly we'll have more information for you in the coming weeks ahead, but I think that's going to do it for this iteration. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.